Hello everyone, I'm Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue, and I'd like to welcome you to the sunny side of the farm. Well, hello everyone, we're here back at our podcast, and I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas today, in a famous place with a famous person, one of my good friends, Sarah Sanders, who's had a surreal environment for the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years. So, Sarah, I appreciate you joining me here in Little Rock.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure and an honor to have you here in my home state. And always good to see friends from the administration, and the president is so lucky to have you out there fighting for him, and it's great to see you and glad that it happens to be in Arkansas.
Well, you're kind to say that. I don't think anybody fought harder than you did, and everyone admires the service that you gave to our administration, to the president, and really one of the toughest jobs in administration. I don't know there's ever been a president like President Trump, so certainly from a communication perspective, you had to be pretty nimble, didn't you?
Absolutely. He made it hard, but he also made it a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and I loved the job that I had. It was such an honor to get to serve the president and the people of this country for just a little over 2.5 years. And we had a wild but fun and exciting ride, and I think we got a lot of great things accomplished, and so it's something that I will always treasure, and I'm grateful for the opportunity and experience that he gave me to be part of his team.
Well, that's great. I know you've been kind of decompressing since the end of June, and it
trying
takes a
to.
while, but I know your 3 children, Scarlett and Huck and George, are happy to have their mama back because it was a 24/7 job, and everyone knew that, but I know Brian's glad to have his wife back as well. But we're here at Doe's Eat Place in Little Rock, Arkansas, sort of a famous venue for Arkansas politicians and political events. And we're back in a small room that I was commenting earlier. It'd be amazing if these walls could talk. I bet they've seen and heard a lot there. But, you know, I want to get back to your service to the president a little later, but you kind of grew up in this environment. So what you took from as a young child, actually preteen, there with your father. He's obviously a good friend of mine. We served as governors together when he was the second term in Arkansas, and I was my first term in Georgia, but I always admired him. I thought he was a wonderful communicator for our value and our way of life, but you had a front row seat in his career there, and so you kind of grew up with it. I hope that helped to prepare you, although I'm not sure anything could fully prepare you for your role.
As much as anything could, it certainly did. And, we often joke in our family that a lot of kids went to summer camp and we went to the festival circuit across Arkansas. And, we've talked about, you and I have every county has a fair and every city has something to celebrate. And we went to all of those events. And so I got to be part of that with my dad. It was one of the things I loved about politics is that you got to interact and meet people from all walks of life, whether it was the fancy, fundraisers or the, back rooms and little eat places across the state. You got to interact with so many different types of people. It was one of the things I loved. You got to see all of those things come together to support one thing, and that was loving either the state or the country. And I got to see that with the president, and it was just such a tremendous expansion on what I got to see as a kid, mostly traveling around Arkansas and later traveling around when my dad was running for president. I love the idea of being part of something bigger than myself and trying to contribute to making it better, and that was the draw that I had both in Arkansas and then again to work in the White House.
True voices of a public service, and I think that's true. I think you served a president that's been known as a populist, but you grew up in a populist household. I like to think of your dad, Mike Huckabee, as probably having a 2-octave range of personal relationships. He was a man of the people ever since I've known him, and a wonderful communicator about the things that really matter to people. How did that influence you and your family? You've got siblings and your family. You've been involved in it for a long time.
He was also, everybody sees the public side. I got to see the personal side. He's also an amazing father. And one of the things that he did that meant so much to us was he showed us how to prioritize the things that mattered. And so no matter what was going on in his life, whether he was a lieutenant governor, or running for president, he made time for our family. Until the day that I graduated from high school, every Wednesday morning I went to breakfast with my dad. It was protected, reserved time. And obviously we spent a lot of time outside of that, but this was my time that his staff knew not to schedule anything. and it was a time for us to share and just spend time together one-on-one, and it was such a special time. But it was also something that showed me how much he prioritized the relationship that he had with me and my brothers, that we had that kind of protected moment. And so I got to see what was important to him, and reminded that no matter what role you take on in a public square, what happens in your personal life has to be a priority. And that was one of the things that I think everybody thinks that politics is probably what helped prepare me best, but being a mom also helped prepare me to take on that role. I'm the first mom that's ever served as the White House press secretary. You mentioned my kids. They're Scarlett, Huck, and George. They're 7, almost 6, and 4, and so a little bit wild and crazy at my house. And I used to always joke that if the press wanted to see real chaos, they had to leave the White House and come to my house, trying to get kids out of the door every morning. And so I think being in that role really helped prepare me in a different way, and in a way that I didn't even know I was getting prepared for. And having to handle kind of all of the different things that toddlers can throw at you at one time certainly mattered, and getting really comfortable saying no and answering the same question over and over again didn't hurt too much either.
I hadn't thought about how motherhood prepared you for your press job there and your communication job, but that's exactly right. Answering the same question over and over, they'll try to trick you into, as children will, in trying to come at you a different way. But
absolutely,
that's you dealt with the press and those 3 earlier on, right? That's good. You mentioned life lessons learned from your dad there with breakfast. I guess those are really the kind of wisdom transfers that you had a real privilege to do. I guess I need to ask you a personal question in case your brothers are listening to this podcast. You were your dad's favorite, right?
I'm going to not answer that question. I got really good at avoiding a lot of questions over the course of 37 years on that topic. But I will say this. I'm the youngest, and I'm the only girl, and that's not a bad spot to be in. So, I have a great relationship with both of my parents and my brothers. We had an amazing family that I'm thankful that they still claim me even in public. And, I'll leave it at that and not get myself into too much more trouble.
We haven't lost that skill set that you gained or honed in the White House there about evading questions that don't need to be answered. But
exactly.
That was a good way. But really, you talked about the idea of motherhood. And one of the things I think I appreciate about President Trump, and one of the things I really learned to respect him when I saw the relationship that he did have with his children as well. And I think those are very important. You talked about a wholesome, healthy family relationship, your mom and dad, your husband, your children, and your siblings. That's really what America's about. That's really what makes us a great country. We get so focused sometimes on the litmus test issues and policies, things that divide us, but isn't that what really families want out of administration?
Absolutely, and they want somebody who cares about the same things that they do. They may not always agree with the president's style or the way he approaches things, but they love that he loves this country, and they love that he wants to do good things for it. I mean, I often say a couple things about the president. One is you can't fake good kids, and he has amazing kids who are very active, and not just in his political life, but they all were very active in his professional life. And you saw them all work in business. I mean, obviously not Barron because he's a little young for that, but they have a great relationship with their father, and you get to see that on full display, having worked in the White House. And you see them out on the road and on the campaign trail, really involved in what he's doing. And not because they need it, because certainly I think they've all had tremendous independent success and could easily avoid a lot of the criticism and not go through the pressure that comes with being in the public eye. And they're willing to take that on. I think that's not just because of them wanting to be part of it, but also because they believe in their dad and they believe in the country, and they want to see great things continue to happen under his leadership. And I think it's really a testament to each of them, as well as the president, that he has that relationship and they're all out there and part of the process.
Well, you mentioned something, and I think it is really the sacrifice of public service when it's done right. just like you. I mean, Brian was a great father and a helper husband to you during that period of time, but you were on 24/7, 365, traveling and different things like that. And just like the president's children, it is a sacrifice for them. They could be doing some pretty significant things, and they were doing significant things other than that. So many people think about the glory and the glamour, but it's obviously a lot more than that. But you mentioned something earlier, and I think this is their motivation because they see it in their dad. And the one thing that I appreciate, other than being a good father, I think, again, this guy loves America.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't apologize for America. That inspires me as a citizen, as a United States citizen of the United States of America. That inspires me. But you cannot question. You might question the way he does things from time to time, but you cannot question his love for this country.
Yeah. And I think you see that in everything that he does. He takes on a lot of these tough challenges that have been ignored for so long. I mean, I think you take a look at what he's doing in this battle with China, and it's not easy, and he's going through a lot of kind of growing pains, and we're taking some minor economic hits, but the president knows that it's the right thing to do for the United States, and that it's something that has to be done. We can't just allow China to continue to come in and reap us off. At some point, we have to decide who's going to be the leader of the world. Is it going to be the United States, or is it going to be China? And this president has decided that as long as he's president, it's going to be the United States. And I think his ability to see things like that and being willing to stand up and fight, when in the past I think we've just brushed them under the rug and moved on because it was easier or more politically advantageous, and he's not willing to do that. And I think that shows day in, day out his love of this country, that he's willing to take on some of those political battles that, you know, his predecessors were unwilling to do.
You mentioned something I also admire, his willingness to fight for what he believes is right.
Yeah.
And this obviously has brought many slings and arrows from the other. I don't think the other side is used to having somebody to stand up and unapologetically declare what he's for in the United States of America.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why he's gotten so much of that. Obviously, your job was to be the first defender with the shield there, and you got many of those things, and the things that were said. I don't think I've ever seen a president castigated so unfairly in the press and publicly as this president has been.
And the country's doing as well as it has under this president, yet 90% of the news coverage about him and his administration is negative. It's hard to argue with that type of information, that the media is not completely biased and out to get this president. And I think that's sad. I think it's sad that the media would rather attack and see the president fail than they would see America succeed. And I think you see that day in, day out. That doesn't mean all media, because that's certainly not the case. There are some people that show up and they work hard and they just want to get information out there. But there are a lot of people whose sole purpose is to show up and try to find ways to hurt anybody that's around the president, to hurt the president himself. And I think that it's a dangerous place that we've moved into that in the political process. But that's one of the reasons I'm glad that the president is so unwavering in his willingness to call out that type of bias and that type of problem that we have in our political system.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. That's a big change. It's frankly a tragic travesty change for the United States of America. I remember when people that were not elected of my choice, my goal was to say, well, my person didn't get elected, but I hope they're good for America in that way. We don't see that today.
And I think the American people are smarter than that. It's one of the reasons they elected Donald Trump in the first place, is they wanted somebody who was a fighter. They wanted somebody who would come in, break up, and change the way that Washington worked. And he's done exactly that. And I think it's one of the big reasons you're going to continue to see him be successful.
Well, I know you've been asked this question a million times, but I'm going to ask it again because I think the people listening to the podcast really want to know on a personal level, what's he like? You know, what you and I have had the experience of being in that Oval Office and listening to him, hearing his heart about those things. But how would you describe your job and what it was like to work with President Trump?
Well, one of the things I loved about working for the president, there were no 2 days that were ever alike. Sometimes that made my job a little bit harder, that you didn't have maybe that kind of structure and routine that some White Houses were used to. But you did have this sort of unity among the team that I was working with that really came there wanting to serve the president, really wanting to change the way that the White House had operated for the last 8 years, and really wanting to do something great for our country. In terms of the president, I think he's one of the most fun, engaging, charming, charismatic people I've ever been around. Even on a bad day, he seems to make things exciting and fun, and he's incredibly smart, and I don't think he gets credit for the command of the issues that he has on such a far-reaching number of topics. Being president is about knowing about one or two things, but it's about knowing about hundreds of things and being able to talk in depth about a lot of those different things, whether it's the agriculture community, whether it's financing and banking to world affairs. You have to have some understanding of all those things and how they relate to one another. And he seems to really be able to take a lot of information quickly and make a decision. I think that is one of the reasons he's been successful. But I think the easiest and simplest way to describe the president is he's just so fun to be around and somebody who really loves the country. And I think you see that in everything he does. But he is certainly tough. I think he gets a little of that from being a tough New Yorker who's fought in the real estate business for a long time. But you see that in everything he's doing, whether it's on this stuff with China and these trade deals, or whether it's on the way that he fights for America's farmers. He's making sure that we're getting the best deal possible. And I think that's, again, one of the reasons he was elected in the first place.
You mentioned something I want to ask you specifically about. I've wondered about it. I want to ask him at one point, and I've told him my observation of this, but you mentioned growing up in New York City and New York real estate business, which is not exactly a calm environment that way, a tough environment. But how in the world did a guy who grew up like that kind of career in business, have such a genuine, sincere affection for our farmers and ranchers? I see it time after time after time there. And it amazes me how he identifies with our agricultural community out here.
And you and I have talked about this. I think one of the reasons is the president loves people who are just good, hardworking Americans, people who make things, create, who build. He can relate to people who are building something, whether it's a building or a crop for the season. He's somebody who appreciates that. And I think he has that kind of love and affection for them because he sees them as people that are building our country. If we can't feed ourselves, then we can't be an independent nation. I think he recognizes that, and he knows not just the love that he has for these people, but the need that we have for this community. And he knows how important that is to our country's success and certainly to our prosperity.
I think that goes in hand with an anecdote I heard about he'd much rather go down with the guy, the electrician and the plumber and all the people who were putting this together rather than talking to the architects and engineers who designed that building, because he said he could learn a lot more from those people who were really building that with their hands about what needed to be done than the people he had hired to design that building.
Yeah, and I think one of the things he used to do, and I always heard, is that he was one of the guys that he would actually go down to the construction site. I think they said that's why he was usually able to get things more on time and on budget, was because he went down and watched things take place firsthand instead of leaving all that to somebody else. And he loves that part of the process and being right there, front row, seeing it all happen. And, I watched in a number of meetings where people were talking about different projects, and he wanted to get into the weeds and talk about the nitty-gritty details of how something was being built and created. And I think that comes from his background as a builder, and I think it's one of the reasons that he has such an affection for the farm community across the country.
And it's cost. I know many people may not think of him as a fiscal conservative, but he's trying to get a good value, just like he got in his business career for the United States of America.
Absolutely.
In that regard as well. You mentioned about the wide array of skill sets that he had. He does have an amazing instinctive ability to make decisions, and much time with less than perfect information, but his intuition, his instincts seem to me to be well honed, well practiced in that regard. He gets information by asking questions, and he's not afraid to have people in front of him who disagree. Yeah. And he'll pepper them with questions about why they disagree and learn from that about the decision he needs to make. So I found that to be a real attribute of a good leader. The way I describe that, you remember the NAFTA discussions about having that withdrawal draft already done from NAFTA, and he allowed me to come in and I said, Mr. President, these are the people that will be hurt by that. There were many of your people and supporters there, and he does change his mind. I like a leader who's decisive and forceful and knows where he wants to go, but what I've also admired is that he has this little back door there. If you go in and continue with the facts and the data, he's also willing to change his mind. Yeah. That's a sign in me of a good leader.
Absolutely, and I think we've seen that a number of times of him I love the fact that he doesn't just surround himself with people that think like he does. He has a pretty diverse cabinet of personalities and people who come from a variety of different backgrounds. And he loves to engage with them, and he loves to take in, all the different sides and then ultimately make the decision that he thinks is best. Often I remind people, they're like, well, why didn't you say this or that? And I'm like, well, nobody elected me to anything. They elected Donald Trump, and I think that he has done a great job of surrounding himself with people that raise different viewpoints, bring in different data points, and then ultimately it's his decision to make. And I think he does a great job taking all that information in, processing it, and making good decisions.
And you did a great job representing him as a citizen of this country. I want to thank you for your service there, your sacrifice with your family. I hope that you and those 3 beautiful children, your husband and your parents, and enjoy a great life here in Little Rock. And I'd love to see you back on the scene at some point in time. But in the meantime, you take those mama skills that you've learned and serve well in the most important constituency in your life.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much. Again, it was an honor to work for the president. It was an honor to work alongside you, and I'm so happy to be home in Arkansas. But I miss all of our friends up there, so tell everybody I said hello.
We'll do that indeed. Thank you, Sarah Sanders. Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Sunny Side of the Farm, and I look forward to visiting you again next month.